Hello, I'm Virginia Eskin, and this is First Ladies of Music, a series celebrating women who have carved out new territory for themselves and left legacies that have influenced all who have followed. From as early as the 5th century, we know that there have been women composers and performers. In the past, many of these women pursued their art with no recognition, but their music proves that through the ages, women composers and performers were creative. In First Ladies of Music, we will show how much we owe these women, past and present, and you will hear their music. Our program today is going to be all about Impressionism and Ragtime in music, and it's going to be all about women. We're going to lead off with two famous sisters. They would be the Boulanger sisters. They came from a wonderful musical family. The mother was a singer. The father was the more famous of the two, Ernest Boulanger, who was a professor at the Conservatoire and the winner of the Prix de Rome in composition. They produced 3 children, and only 2 of them survived, and that would be Lili Boulanger and her famous sister, Nadia. Lili's dates are 1893, and she had a very short life, dies in 1918. The thing that we would like to sort of remember about Lili, because so many people laugh and they say, well, that's the boulangerie, and what they're referencing then is, of course, the famous school and salon that Nadia ran. But the younger sister was supposed to have had the bigger talent, and she was determined to win the Prix de Rome, and it probably came from the fact that her famous father had done that, and so talented little daughter really wanted to be as good as her father, and she started at age 17 with probably what we would call today a bad case of tuberculosis. So she knew that she was very ill and weak. She's the first woman, however, to win the Prix de Rome in 1913 for the cantata Faust et Hélène, and she wrote many song cycles and some orchestral pieces, some small piano pieces, and quite a few songs. I think that in trying to understand why anybody is not well known, and that's been a sort of a common theme in our series, First Ladies, if you die young, that certainly takes you out of the action. And worse, if your music then goes out of print, it becomes really a very difficult operation. With the women's movement, we are readdressing some of these issues. Let's listen to a little bit of the music that Lili Boulanger, that's the younger tragic sister, composed. just heard the piece by Lili Boulanger, D'un Matin de Printemps, played by the Bay Area Women's Philharmonic. Joanne Folletta was the conductor. Let's listen to Lili Boulanger's song, Attente, which means waiting. And what she does is an interesting device. She uses contrary motion, and it sounds like this in the little intro that the piano plays. What she does by doing that is raises sort of speculation. She lays in this very sensual bed of harmonies, and that cues up, and the singer can then cruise in with the beautiful words. And another thing that's happening in Impressionistic music is these wonderful plummy chords. The composers, just like the artists of the day, were giving themselves permission to use all sorts of new colors, and the music required a lot of pedal, which is like the art. It was full of liquidity, and it was very shiny and silky. This song is particularly an example of that. Here's Attente by Lili Boulanger. You just heard Lili Boulanger's song, Attente. It was sung by mezzo-soprano Sharon Mabry with pianist Rosemary Platt. Now, our next woman in Impressionism is Germaine Tailleferre. She had a wonderfully long life, 1892, and lived till 1983, almost 100 years. Germaine Tailleferre was the only woman member of the influential group of French composers called Les Six, right after World War I. Her works received a good deal of attention for that time, but as her life goes on, she sort of disappears from view, even despite the fact that she continued to compose well into her 80s. She became a composer despite her father's objections. And that is in contrast, of course, to our previous lady who had a musical father, and Lili Boulanger had the approbation of her father. Now you have Germaine Tailleferre, just the opposite. The father is not supporting her, even though the mother was. She studied at the Conservatoire from the age of 12 and was highly regarded there. Tailleferre was very talented. Everyone agreed on that. But she had to endure patronizing remarks from critics and even other composers, probably due to the fact that her elegant, charming music was considered feminine, and that was a bad thing. However, a composer no less than Maurice Ravel turned that opinion on its head. He said, her music is full of feminine charm, not at all an unworthy quality in music. Now I'd like to share with you a small piano piece that Germaine Tailleferre composed. It's called Pastorale, and it's dedicated to her first husband, Ralph Barton. I just played Pastorale by Germaine Tailleferre. Now I'd like us to hear a very sparkly piece by Germaine Tailleferre. It's the last movement of her harp concertino. It's the rondo movement. And listen for the snare drum, because it comes to the rescue of the piece at the very end. You just heard the last movement of Germaine Tailleferre's Harp Concertino, played by Gillian Benet, the harpist, accompanied by the Bay Area Women's Philharmonic. Joanne Falletta was the conductor. Now we're going to move to a very different flavor. This would be Florence Price, 1887 to 1953. She was a black woman born into a turbulent time in our racial history in America. She studied first with her mother, and then she went to the New England Conservatory of Music way up in Boston, and she was a student of George Chadwick, who happened to be the head of the New England Conservatory at that time. She was employed as an organist and pianist when she was a student there at various Boston churches, and I get the impression she was an outstanding musician. She graduated in 1906 and returned to her native Little Rock to teach at Shorter College in Arkansas. And she marries Thomas Prince and continues to compose and to be published by some of the most important publishers of the day. It would be Schirmer and McKinley. Later, they move up north to Chicago, where she continues her musical life. In fact, her symphony in E minor was premiered by the Chicago Symphony under Frederick Stock in 1933. This would make her the first black woman to have had her music performed by a major American orchestra. We're going to hear selections by Florence Price from her Mississippi River Suite, which was composed in 1934. And the important thing to remember about it is the fact that she did not turn her back on her roots. On the contrary, she incorporated wonderful idiomatic, stylistic things about her black heritage and in a way empowered them to a much higher order. Because at the same time, in the 30s, you have all kinds of extraordinary jazz being composed. Black composers are admired, but very rare for a woman who's had that classical training to marry the sort of folkloric quality of her past and her experience and put it into a classical context. You've heard a portion of the Mississippi River Suite by Florence Price, performed by the Bay Area Women's Philharmonic, conducted by Apo Shu. Among the spirituals that she incorporated into this rather classical work are Deep River, Let My People Go, and Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen. This music surely captures the spirit of the time and of the people, as well as the slave songs that express those people's yearning for freedom. You're listening to First Ladies of Music. We'd love to hear from you. You can send your comments via email to ladies@wfmt.com. You're listening to the WFMT Radio Network. Well, that was Florence Price in her classical mode. Now I'd like you to hear a very charming little, what we call genre piece. That means just a small slice of a style. And Florence Price wrote charming little pieces. They were for the home pianist. And what I like about this little piece, it is very picturesque. It's called Silk Hat and Walking Cane. And you could just imagine a very elegant man all duded up walking down the street with spats on and a top hat. And what she does in the little piece is reminiscent of Debussy. He loved syncopation, and sometimes people say, well, it sounds a little like ragtime. So I think this little piece by Florence Price is a wonderful bridge from our classical genre to the upcoming syncopation and sort of jazz quality that's in music. Listen to Silk Hat and Walking Cane, composed by Florence Price. That was Florence Price, Silk Hat and Walking Cane. Now we move to ragtime. And there's a whole story that's really interesting in connection with the ladies who composed rag music. First of all, they were proper ladies. They were classically trained, and they weren't supposed to be writing this kind of music in the first place. Women who wrote ragtime did it, as we've often said, under the radar. They had to use pseudonyms, and sometimes they only wrote one rag because once their husband found out they were playing this kind of music in the parlor, they were looked upon with disfavor. It's been an interesting research project to try and find these rags because oftentimes they're buried under a man's name or with a name that didn't even belong to her. I'd like to explain, for those of you who don't know what a rag is, it's an interesting sandwich of two things that happen in music. You know, when you rip paper, it's ragged, or if you try to rip cloth, it's going to be torn and ragged. Well, what happens in music is that you have a very steady bass, usually a march on the bottom, and then you marry that to a very unsteady top part in the right hand. The synergy that happens by doing that is delicious. The man, of course, who became the most famous for doing that would be Scott Joplin. And what he did was to take a march in the left hand, very steady rhythm, and then he sort of got a little wild in the right hand. I'll play just a little bit, and I'll play it straight, and then I'll play it the way he wrote it, and you'll hear what I'm talking about. Here's a rag by Scott Joplin, the straight version. Well, that's incredibly boring. So now let me play Joplin's little demonstration I'm doing here, and I'll show you how it sounds when the steady left hand is joined by the disjointed right hand. So what I'm doing there is trying to show you when you put both hands together, one of them is steady, the other is disjointed. That's what is called ragtime. And Scott Joplin was the master of it, and we call him the king of ragtime because he was very published. The women who heard that music, they were supposed to be in their salon, not in the saloon. And ragtime was adopted by respectable women, and they composed their own rags, and these are now starting to come to light. The queen of ragtime would have to be a woman named May Aufderheide. You just heard Dusty Rag by May Aufderheide, and I happen to be playing it, and I love her rags. So we're talking about May Aufderheide, and especially this rag, Dusty, which was her first big hit in 1908. It's undoubtedly true to say that she became a role model, and the other women who were alive at the time wishing they could perhaps have a career in the arts, and that was denied women. A proper woman did not go on the road. So you were left at home to sew, to run a household, and, if you were talented, compose a rag. With the exception of May, whose father got into publishing her rags. And that, of course, must have been an incredible help, and it made quite a bit of money for the two of them. Most of the women composers whom we've come to know about from that period, the turn of the century, 1900s, on up into the 30s, some of them were the first women to drive a car. They were very involved in the suffragette movement. So what it says to me is that these were thinking women. They knew how to run a home. They knew how to play the piano. They could even write down the music. You have a whole period in our history where women are sort of taking charge of things. They are able to compose these delightful rags in the privacy of their home, their own salon, and they can play them there. And it's fortunate that we now have publishers who are interested in reclaiming the music, republishing it. It's a wonderful thing that's happened. And even though there aren't very many, maybe 15 women that we know about, it's better than nothing. Now, our next woman ragtime writer is Mary Watson. And the reason I include her is because she's one of these ones I mentioned before who only wrote one rag. And this one's called Dish Rag. And I like it because so many of the rag titles relate to food. Chicken chowder, pickles and peppers, possum stew, this one dish rag. And the women are reflecting their background. And this rag, Dish Rag, has a very clever middle part. She writes on the music, knock or clap on the piano, and you'll hear it. You just heard Dish Rag by Mary Watson. Now we're going to hear two rags by living women because the genre is very much alive, and I've had the pleasure of commissioning a couple of rags. The first one you're going to hear is called Judy's Rag, and it's by Judith Lang Zaimont. And she's very much alive. She's my age and busy composing classical music, and she has a very interesting life as an author, a composer, an educator, mother, wife. And this rag is interesting because she puts it in a very exotic key. All the old-fashioned rags are in easy keys, easy to play because they're for home pianists. not for Judith. She composes in the dark keys, and it's in A flat minor. Listen to it. Here's Judy's Rag by Judith Zaimont. Now here's another rag by a living woman. Her name is Marjorie Merryman, and I commissioned this rag for a CD I put together, and it's called Dog Day Rag. And Marjorie wrote it in the dog days of August. And what I love about this rag is the fact that it's got all the elements. It's got the steady left hand, it's got the disjointed right hand, but it sounds like Mahler. Here I'm going to demonstrate what I'm talking about. Here's a little bit of Marjorie Merryman's Dog Day Rag. So what you heard there was a little bit of Dog Day Rag, composed by Marjorie Merryman. It proves that ragtime is alive. Ragtime is an American invention. We're going to end our segment on ragtime with Pickles and Peppers. It's a rag composed by Adaline Shepherd in 1908. It was used in the presidential campaign by William Jennings Bryan. That was Pickles and Peppers by Adaline Shepherd, played by me, your host, Virginia Eskin. Our next program is going to focus on the women composers from the 1930s. They flourished and they were very intellectual, and their music reflects what's happening in the times. It's very architectural, and it's strong, and it's well built. I hope you'll join us. First Ladies of Music with Virginia Eskin is produced by Carolyn Pollan from the WFMT Radio Network. Steve Robinson is the executive producer. The engineer is Mary Mazurik. Thanks to Alice Abraham, librarian at WGBH Radio in Boston. And special thanks to Boston's Northeastern University for their generous support. I'm Virginia Eskin, inviting you to join me again next time for First Ladies of Music. This is the WFMT Radio Network.